reading the story of a gentleman down in Indianapolis a few years ago, carried around with him, as I often do, lip balm. A little thing like this. One day, he, without even really looking at it, he just kind of started to unscrew the lid and put it on his finger and proceeded to put it on his lip. When he realized it wasn't lip balm he had grabbed, it was super glue. Now, I don't know what exactly this would do to your lips, but I have got it on my fingers before, and I know it does stick well to that. Well, this gentleman had to be hospitalized. And it actually took quite a while because, as I'm sure you can appreciate, trying to pry lips apart, not a fun thing. We're going to talk a little bit about glue, actually, today, of all things. It's good stuff, that glue. I'll put the verse. Now, I read a large chunk there. Last week, we looked at the first part of that, where it talked a lot about how we speak to one another and singing, filled with the Holy Spirit rather than being drunk on wine. And it goes through a large passage, and we talked about that and said, immediately following that talks about marriage. Oh, and it probably has something to do with marriage. In fact, this is the third week we're going to talk about the whole area, the relationship between husband and wife. And we've seen as we've gone through this, that to have a Christian marriage is to live a Christian life. They go hand in hand. And today we're going to start a transition, I guess, from the theoretical to the practical. We'll be kind of in between the two, I guess, a little bit today. But we come to a verse that is actually towards the end of our passage. It goes like this, and this is a slightly different translation. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. And some might say, if you're really on the ball and attentive, didn't we look at this verse 2 weeks ago? Isn't this part of a passage we looked at? And the answer is yes. And I said at that time we'd come back to it in a little more detail. Marriage is not a destination. It's a journey. And it's one that will change both you and your partner. And the question is, in what way will it change you? Good, bad? Both work. Both happen. We're going to have an invitation to grow throughout about this. We've been reading a lot about marriage, of course, as we've been going through this series today. There are a lot of good books about marriage. And I encourage you to read some of them. Today we're going to talk about a bunch of books. The Meaning of Marriage by Timothy Keller. Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. The Christ-Centered Marriage by Neil Anderson. We're going to look at a lot of books, actually. I want to learn more. I encourage you to read some of these. I want to start off by talking about the word covenant. It's an interesting word up here. It's hold fast. It's actually a combination of two words in the Greek. This word, hold fast. It actually has to do with this. It's glued together is literally what it says in the Greek. But we find the word glued. But it's another word that means, I don't really know how to translate it. It's kind of like a man shall leave his father and mother and be very glued to his wife. Very glued. I have in my hand this crazy glue. I was using some other glue this morning as well. We were, last song that we're going to sing a little bit, we decided to cut one of the verses, so I got a little sticky note and told Dale, stick this on the page. And there's a real difference between a sticky note glue and this glue. They're very different things, aren't they? That sticky note, I can pull it off. It does no damage to the papers underneath. If I try to glue things together with this, they don't come apart so easily. This is actually really what this verse in Ephesians is talking about. That a man shall leave his parents and be super glued to his wife. Now, right away, that may not sound real exciting. You ever heard somebody say, along the lines of, I really love him or I really love her. Why do we need a piece of paper to prove that we love each other? Why, of course, marriage certificate. Because doesn't that just complicate things? And the answer is absolutely it does. That's the whole point of it, actually. And the idea behind that question is that won't romantic passion be extinguished or at least curtailed by the act of marriage? Does a piece of paper have anything to do with romance? And the concept that they're asking when you ask that question is, if I make a commitment to you, will I feel less special? Maybe it's even a comment, but I love you, but not enough to close my options and give myself to you forever. That if I commit myself to you, it's actually going to cause me more problems. Now, I want to be clear, a marriage without a certain degree of passion and emotional commitment is not the biblical idea. But marriage is more than that. We have a consumer mentality in our world today. What can I get out of things? Now, what can I give? It's certainly true of church life. And it's certainly true of marriage. That we look about what can I get out of it, not what can I give to it. Covenant is something very different. It's a bond that is much more. It's something, an idea that might be disappearing a little bit. It's a legal term, a business term, but it's something that's more than just that. It is a blend, I suppose, in the Christian message of love and of law. Where I bind myself completely and fully to one another. One of the authors I mentioned earlier, Timothy Keller, who's a pastor down in New York City, wrote, "It is a relationship that is more intimate because it is legal." Love is not just some emotion, but it is a choice that I make to commit myself to another person. The idea of married love is I love you enough to curtail my future options for your sake. To give myself to you completely for your sake. To commit myself to you for your sake. That I bind myself to you. That I'm willing to be satisfied no matter what with you as my partner. That I am willing to be satisfied no matter what with your love, with your help. Now, I don't very often get to quote the Song of Solomon in church. It's one of those books in the Bible we don't look at very often. In fact, we kind of hide. But listen to this. Where Solomon says, "Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is strong as death. Jealousy is fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. If a man offered for love all the wealth of his house, he would be utterly despised." These are strong words about permanence. Now, Song of Solomon's poetry, and I don't know, as I think of poetic language describing love like death, that may not sound like a very appealing poetic phrase, as a metaphor we would often choose to use except in really negative terms. But he's saying that that's how powerful love is. There is nothing that ends it. There's nothing that stops it. It's something of great power and strength. And true love is the melding together of two lives. Not simply using my partner for status or satisfaction or even sex. The law comes over my commitment and says I am bound to the good of my partner. The promise of permanence allows that we will grow together despite struggles. You know, when a couple starts off by dating, they're trying to impress one another, to entice one another. Perhaps I'm trying to look better than I am. I'm almost selling myself in that kind of relationship. But marriage, when we move into that stage, is where we find I like this phrase I read, space of security. To be myself. To grow as to how I am. There's a story, I thought I quoted earlier, Keller tells about a wedding he did, and the couple wrote their own vows, and he didn't really hear them until got to the wedding itself, which is never a good idea. And he said, basically, what it said was in one sentence, the vow. And it was like this: I love you, and I want to be with you. And he said, well, that's nice. Sounds pretty, sounds kind of romantic. It's an expression of current love for each other. It was nice and good, but it's not a covenant. Because wedding vows are not supposed to be a declaration of present love, but a mutually binding promise of future love. Future love. Think about that for a moment. Often kind of equated, we go through, periodically, I get invited to different ceremonies. And sometimes you get invited to a graduation ceremony. And then that kid gets a little older, and then you get invited to their wedding a couple of years later. And they kind of feel like they're similar type of ideas. People talk a lot, everybody gets dressed up in a tie and looks fancy. And they feel kind of similar, and yet there is a big difference between the two. Because a graduation is a celebration of what has been accomplished. A wedding is a celebration of what will be accomplished. It is a looking forward. It's a celebration of what is to come yet. A wedding is not a culmination, it is a beginning. It is a commitment of not what I have become, it is a commitment of what I will become. We are often defined by that promise. Story, the lady by the name of Wendy Plump wrote about how her marriage disintegrated after she had an affair. And she said, the great sex was a given. When you have an affair, you already know that there's going to be passion and urgency, newness. The illicit nature practically guarantees it. But then she writes on, the affair came to light. She discovered her husband was also having an affair, and the marriage fell apart. And she said, in her reflections afterwards, she started to think about her parents. And she wrote this: they had this marriage of 50 years behind them, and it is a monument to success. A few weeks or maybe months of illicit passion could not hold a candle to it. You're 75. Which would you rather have? Years, if occasionally strained, devotion, or something that looks a little bit like an Iraqi city cratered with spent artillery? She wrote her parents' marriage was the creation of time and will. And it was indeed more interesting than a fleeting romance, no matter how passionate. I just want to finish. That promising is the means to freedom. In promising, You limit options now in order to have a wonderful, fuller option later. You curb your freedom now so that you can be free to be there in the future for people who trust you. It was a very powerful wording. Yeah, but it's hard. C.S. Lewis talks about the German hatred for the Jews, and he said, you know what, they started with this idea they didn't like them. Then they started acting, and because they acted upon their hatred, they hated them more. And then C.S. Lewis goes on to talk about the fact that the opposite is just as true. If you act loving towards someone, you learn to love them more. Put this in the context of marriage. You act like you love them and you learn to love them more. We put that as the opposite, don't we? I feel love, so therefore I might do something nice to them. He's making this argument that if we just start off with emotion, we don't get anywhere, but we start with acting loving to somebody, we get more out of it. And covenant gives life structure to become more of that person of love. When we are glued together to become one, we have that promise that we can move on. Boy, it's hard. Listen to this. I'm getting my quotes mixed up here. This is Thomas Keller, I read earlier. So what do you do in marriage? You do acts of love despite a lack of feeling. You may not always feel tender, sympathetic, eager to please. Well, but in your actions you must be tender, understanding, forgiving, and helpful. And if you do that, as time goes on, you will not only get through dry spells of marriage, but they will become less frequent and deep. And you will become more constant in your feelings. This is what can happen when you decide to love. The second part I want us to think about with this verse is something called falling forward. I stole this phrase from an author by the name of Gary Thomas. I like it because it gives an idea that we all mess up at times. But at least in marriage we should be messing up in the same direction. An author by the name of Trevor Longman said, because marriage more than any other relationship reflects God's involvement with us and bears more potential to draw our hearts to heaven, it can more readily give us a taste of hell. More opportunity than any other relation to point us towards either heaven or hell. Boy, it sure feels in our day and age like life should be easy, because often it is. But the Bible is all about us overcoming. Why do we make marriage vows? Why would we do that? If I got up here and I said just this one little thing, I got her to promise to eat, what would you think? What do you think the context of that statement would be? Perhaps you might immediately jump to, perhaps I'm talking about somebody who's fighting with anorexia. Or maybe you're thinking, well, maybe they're so upset or grieved by something that they just can't bring themselves to eat. They can't think of anything but the... You might start to concoct a story. Would your story automatically then jump to, well, it's probably a bunch of ravenous teenagers who just can't stop eating? No. You would immediately think that I made somebody promise to eat because for them it is hard to eat. Why do we make promises and vows? Because it's hard. Because it's going to be hard. It's not because it's going to be easy. And as couples, it's difficult. I read the stat this week that the average married couple in North America spends 27 minutes a week in meaningful conversation. That's not a lot. The average couple will get the majority of their conversations in around their third date. And then it gets quieter. Do you know when actually conversations get really going again? On average, they say a year before divorce. It's not normal to spend a lot of time in meaningful conversation. I've read something I don't completely agree with, and that is the opposite of love is apathy. I'm not fully convinced there, but there is some truth in that. You know, we as men, because of our communication styles that are different with women, are often really good at communicating apathy, even if we don't mean it. And often apathy leads to more apathy and has all sorts of unintended results. We need to figure out, as couples, how we communicate. There's a great book. I keep pointing towards books today. But it's called The 5 Languages of Love. I encourage many couples over the years to read it, because it talks about the fact that we communicate love in different ways. And it's absolutely true. I communicate love in a different way than my wife does. I know she feels really loved if I show up with some flowers. I give her a present like that. She loves that. But you show up, well, number one, give me flowers means nothing. But she loves it when I give her gifts like that. For me, that's not quite how I receive love. It's nice if you give me a present. I like that. But you give me some time to go do my own thing. I like that. Something like that. I really feel loved in those moments. Or we spend time together. Or spend time doing something different. We all communicate and receive love in different ways. And often, couples don't understand how they communicate to each other. And as a result, when their struggles come up, when things come up, it becomes very difficult to communicate. One of our authors, Gary Thomas, he wrote down 6 things we need to understand. I'm just going to quickly give them to us. When we have conflict, don't run away from conflicts and problems, confront them. I remember having a conversation once with a young lady who was really angry at her husband. And even when I talked to her, it was, well, why are you mad at her? Why are you mad at him? And it was, well, if he really loved me, he would know why I was mad at him. To which my response was, really? How is he supposed to know that? Men are no better at it, by the way. At least I'm not. I often start stewing in where I'm sitting and getting annoyed because why isn't this going the way that I want it to go? And I never end up telling Zoe that I'm upset. I just sit there and stew. We shouldn't run from conflicts. We should be available to speak. We should understand that compromise is not a dirty word in marriage, but we need to be willing to give up things that are important to ourselves. We need to accept that we have shortcomings and do it in a loyal way. It's so easy to go around and talk to other people about complain about my wife or my husband. To gossip about them with people. But we need to loyally accept the fact that, yeah, they do have shortcomings, but I still love them. We need to foster forgiveness. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? And to foster it quickly. We need to be people who love grace and understand that I need grace, my partner needs grace. And we've already talked about the fact that I'm sorry, you married a sinner, so you might as well learn to love them. Because guess what? Your partner also married a sinner. We all have our failings. So we have this remarkable word in our passage, and that's the word one. Do you know what? Christ came to this world to serve humanity. And he came and he says it should be an example to all of us that we need to learn to be servants. If you don't believe me, look at Philippians chapter 2 later. Christ came to serve us. Isn't that backwards, don't you see? The King of Kings comes to visit. Shouldn't we be serving him? We certainly talk about the need to serve God. But he came to serve us, and he says right in Philippians chapter 2 that our attitude should be the same as that of Christ Jesus. We're going to look at that in a couple of weeks. A little more detail. But the bottom line is, if I am glued together with my partner, my attitude should be the same as Christ, that my goal is not myself, my goal is us. That I am not looking out for my best interests, I'm looking out for our best interests. I'm not looking out for what pleases me, I'm looking out for what pleases us, because the two shall become one. If you want to watch a great movie about relationships and marriage that both a husband and wife can watch without getting sick, because sometimes I can't watch some of those movies. But it's really great because you can also watch it with your kids. It's Disney's movie, The Incredibles. It's all about overcoming marital issues. And there's a minor character in it by the name of Frozone. He's a superhero, that's why he's a weird name. And disaster is coming, so he's going to grab his super suit. And it's not where it's supposed to be, and he starts yelling at his wife, "Have you seen my super suit?" She yells out, "Why do you need it?" And he yells back, "Because I just need it. Where is it?" He says, "Hang on." She yells back, "But we're having a big party tonight that I've been planning for months. You can't go out and save the world." And he yells back, "Woman, this is for the greater good." And she yells back at him, "What do you mean? I'm your wife. I am your greater good." And she's exactly right. I didn't do that in a great accent, but Samuel Jackson. I don't sound ever look anything like him, but it's actually a great movie. I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, but it has all about this superhero couple and trying to overcome their marital issues. You know what? That's the whole idea. That line, "I am your wife, I am your greater good." It's a good starting place, isn't it? The two serve the one. The husband and wife serve each other to make the couple stronger. And we need to learn to speak to each other in such a way that we are becoming stronger. And so I do things that I relinquish control of things that I want to be in charge of, and do things to help my wife. And Gary Thomas, who I quoted earlier, says this: "Money is the medium of power. More often than not, arguments are not about money, but power. The battle is not about who is most trustworthy or whose heart is most deeply desires to sacrifice for the other, but about who controls the most palpable means of setting the family agenda. Time becomes a commodity of contention as well. Conflicts over time and money cloud the real issue. Are we willing to sacrifice for the good and the glory of the other? Quarrels over money and time usually reflect a demand to own our life rather than to serve the other with our wealth and existence. The typical fight over who should pick up the kids usually is about whose time is more valuable, who works the hardest, who is the least appreciated. It's not wrong to alternate chores or divvy up responsibility, but the hurtful interactions usually reflect drawing battle lines over more petty matters. The next time you battle it out with your spouse over time or money, pause and remind yourself that your prayers to become more like Jesus Christ are being put to the test here. Be willing to honestly ask yourself this question: am I playing a petty power game? Or am I using the sometimes unpleasant realities of life to shape my stubborn nature toward that of a servant? We so easily can fall into those habits. Instead, we need to learn, how do I best serve? And how do we express love? And to say it clearly. I was thinking about this week's mention that Zoe loves to get flowers. Well, that's one way you can serve her. One way I communicate love is often when we have a day which is a little less hectic in the morning. I like to get up and I like to make breakfast and make something special for breakfast. And that's really, I was thinking about one of the ways that I communicate to my family that I love them. Now my wife, she likes me to make breakfast. That's really makes her life easier. But it's not even how she receives love. And we need to be able to tell each other that, hey, I'm making breakfast because I love you. She may not automatically, she may think, yeah, I make most of the meals. You should do it. We need to be able to express to you, hey, understand this is how I love you. And to say that. And to understand and accept that, we give and receive love in different ways, and learn to become servants in that way. And to show love in very practical manners. Because otherwise we descend into this, well, I did that, you did this, and I need to control the money, I need to control the agenda, I've already loved you, we fall into petty differences. But to do things, to say that we love each other, and to make sure our partner understands that that's why I'm doing it. Love is a very difficult, complicated thing. But the more we love each other, the more we become one flesh. We're going to sing a song, just a simple commitment.